Christopher Luxon, new National Party leader, welcome and thank you for making the time for us.
Great to be with you.
When in your life did you first decide you wanted to be Prime Minister?
I wouldn't describe it that way. I've always had a really big interest in politics, but also business and also communities. I think the first time I became aware of anything political was my favourite book was an Usborne book on World War II that I used to get from the Cockle Bay School Primary Library. And in there it was the first time I read about a guy called Winston Churchill. And I thought, that was interesting. And essentially what I've been doing, since I was a young person, is reading about great business leaders and great political leaders. And each and every year I pick one to study and away I go. So I've always had a curiosity around, I guess, leadership as a principle. And when you're trying to lead large organisations with tens of thousands of people, it's important stuff.
Would you say that the National Party has always been your natural political home, or it is in the time and place in which we find ourselves?
Absolutely. The values of the National Party are essentially what I've built my life around and will continue to do so. And I think those values are timeless. And I actually think those values are what actually informs us working through the challenges and also the opportunities we have here in New Zealand and how we actually convert them. They should be our guide.
And what are those key principles?
Well, it's about things like personal responsibility. It's about caring for others. It is fundamentally about, that if you're going to work hard, you deserve to do well off the back of that. Freedom, choice, all those traditional values of ours.
I'd like just to go back to your speech earlier when you say you're going to be the national party,
yeah,
and you talked about productivity,
yeah,
and lifting incomes.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about the economy. If Christopher Luxon becomes the Prime Minister, what are some key moves that you'd make to really get the economy firing?
Well, if I maybe just pass a comment on the National Party, and what I mean by that is that I remember, I think, in the first lockdown, I went through and read all the history books around the National Party. And, what's clear over the last 84 years is that essentially you've got a very strong set of, and the formation of this party was a very common alignment around a set of economic principles, essentially. And then what you had is a urban conservative piece and an urban liberal piece and a rural conservative piece. And that has been the traditions in our party of moderate liberal, moderate conservative, moderate being the operative word. And when we've been at our best, that's been critical. And when we've been at our best, what's also been important is that we actually represent all the communities of New Zealand. It was called the National Party because it was supposed to, it does act in the national interest, and that's why it's there. So, that's what I meant when I said National Party. We are a party that wants to be talking to all communities across New Zealand as a mainstream political party, and we think our principles can help all people across this country. So that's that piece of it. On terms of economics, what I was just saying there is that if we're really honest with each other, over the last 30 years, economists call it productivity, but in its simplest terms, it's the value of the stuff that we produce and sell to the world divided by the people making it. And essentially that means that we really haven't made good productivity gains here. Grant Robertson, I remember, used to talk about it when he was in opposition, but doesn't seem to talk about it too much now. But the reality is people work hard, but then actually their incomes don't rise, and as a result their living standards fall. And so
instead of, say, putting in 40 hours and producing 50 hours...
Yeah, it's not about working harder. It's fundamentally about working smarter, honestly, because New Zealanders are already working incredibly hard. But if you go look at other small advanced economies, you could take Denmark, Switzerland, Singapore, Ireland, Israel, and you look at the different components of those economies, they are able to generate higher wealth than us because of the ability to be able to generate higher income and therefore higher wages. And so it's really about how are we as a country going to deliver more productivity, and not productivity like just work harder, actually be smarter to get into a higher value of goods and services that we can sell to the world.
So as part of that, looking at some of these other countries such as Denmark, Israel is a good example, and looking at what interventions it is that the state makes rather than the government's just going to do a whole pile of stuff.
Yeah.
The government's just going to do a little bit of stuff.
Yeah.
It's looking. Is it about being a bit more canny about the comparative?
Well, it's we're well. I get it. Free markets, but free markets are often imperfect, and there needs to be interventions. What I'm talking about here is each country's got something different to offer us because there's 195 countries in the world, and they do some interesting things. Israel is an interesting country because essentially how it does tech and startups and is able to build entrepreneurs in the technology space is actually really interesting. And the interface between business and government and academia actually is what sort of drives that ecosystem of startup nation, as they would call it. And so I think there's things like that. As you think about a person has a great idea from New Zealand, they want to build a business. How do we think about the chain that gets them from small company to big company, that therefore generates higher returns, that drives higher salaries, which in turn ends up giving people more freedom and choice. That making more money isn't actually an end in itself. It's actually about when you have higher salary and wages, you have more choices about what you get to do with your life. And that's why economics is important, because if we get the economics straight, then we can actually make the investments we need socially and environmentally.
So a better economy, more tax paid, more money to the health system.
Yeah, and what I'd say to you at the moment is, the government fundamentally, it seems to think it creates everything. It thinks that, I think the philosophy emerging is, we make the jobs happen. Well, actually, no, they don't. It's actually small business owners up there in Auckland today. Just to give you an example, a couple of weeks ago, I went off and met with 25 different hospitality businesses in Auckland. Well, they can't trade at the moment, but you can go to a retail outlet. And the problem with them not trading is that they actually can't, that they don't have any income coming through. So how do they pay salaries, wages? How do they set that long-term trajectory right? We have situations where, I was talking to a small business owner the other day because I try and spend often a Friday afternoon with different businesses. And he had a new contract for a customer in Australia. It required him to spend $1.5 million worth of capital to make a new product to send to Australia. But he said, Chris, I don't think I'll bother. And I said, why is that? And I said, well, he said, the first thing is I've won the customer in Australia as an export customer. That's exactly what New Zealand needs. We don't make money selling to each other. We've got to go out in the world and make it happen. But he said, the freight costs have gone up for 4 times. Auckland Port has a poor on-time performance record, so I often can't get out there. I could fail to deliver to the customer on time. They'll then choose to actually go to someone locally in Australia. The Australian government has said if you're going to invest $1.5 million in capital, you can depreciate it immediately. And so a lot of people are investing in their businesses. And he said also, I don't have certainty, with this government. He said, I've been hit with all these things. Ideas happen in Wellington, get thrown over the fence, and small business has to deal with it. So my view is this government isn't really pro-trade or pro-business and doesn't really understand it. That these are, probably, talking to banks, probably, almost 30%, 25% of borrowing of mortgages is actually people borrowing against their house to finance their business. And so, that's those sort of, and I know I'm getting quite detailed on you, and it's getting quite a technical conversation, but the point is you've got to get into the detail to work your way through the problem, to get the solution right, that ultimately is designed to get more money into this place so that we can raise salaries and give people more choice. Another good example that links very strongly to that is, education. That's been the most startling thing. And I guess, Luke, it's really startled me, in the last 12 months of being here. That's the set of statistics that I hadn't fully internalised. When you've only got 60% of our kids going to school 9 days out of 10, and you've got, 40% not making that, you can't even get them in the door. And then when you start to look at our maths, reading, science scores, they have fallen from being on the top of the OECD to the bottom. We're often, the last, the second to last, or the third to last on those measures now. And you don't feel it within New Zealand if your whole life's here, but our relative competitiveness for building a global, for a country that has to go out into the world and do business, that's a real problem, because if we don't have kids with the skills that can get to those higher value jobs and those salaries, that's what I mean by productivity. So education becomes a really key part of it. And then you've got to get to the root cause of that. Well, actually what's happened is we've got child-centred learning, not teacher-instructed learning, there was an interesting report this week I read around structured literacy programs, and so I know I'm getting into the detail.
Yeah, it sounds like a good conversation for another day.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
I'm just trying to demonstrate that actually the plan matters, the detail does matter. You've got to have a vision of improving educational outcomes for New Zealanders and for New Zealand kids, but you've got to face up to the reality of it. How in this government we've spent more money on education, but we've got poorer outcomes. And that's what I'm saying about focus, getting things done, delivering a plan, solving the problem.
Do New Zealanders pay too much tax or not enough?
Look, you always say they should pay a lot less tax, but the bottom line is we have a series of commitments to manage, and that's, I don't have a strong view on, I can tell taxes aren't going up, but, you've got to think about timing for tax cuts and get that setting right.
So, under your leadership, we'd expect some sort of movement around thinking about how the tax system's set up to lower the tax burden at some point before the next election?
Well, look, we'll work through that in the coming days. At this point, we actually, 2 hours in, we haven't really been able to think and get all of the thinking and policy thinking straight. But I can tell you what we believe is that we've got to power up business in New Zealand, and we've got to unleash confidence and enterprise in order to get people out there wanting to make things happen. That small business owner that I just told you the story about who won't take the customer in Australia, that is a tragic loss for New Zealand, because that's 2 or 3 extra jobs that got added to his 12-man shop.
I'll just hew quickly back to something that I guess was taking place under the previous leadership. And there was a bit of a focus on some kind of what you call culture wars issues, and in particular Judith Collins' leadership. A big play made around the government, this Hei Puapua report, which the government says it's not its policy, but nevertheless there was a fair bit of time and energy spent on that. What's your view on that, and is that something that will be a central important thing to your leadership, or do you regard it as more of a second order issue, distraction?
Oh, look, we turned the page, we're going forward. We believe fundamentally in a very inclusive New Zealand, and I do think there's a lot of identity politics across the political spectrum, and we are each and every individual actually much bigger than our individual identities, and that's what we've got to focus on, is actually how do we collectively as a whole in New Zealand take our country forward.
So you're not too concerned about sort of, I guess, the spectre of iwi co-governance that some people have been raising over the last...
Well, we have real concerns around that. If you think about the Three Waters issue, we've got very convoluted and nonsensical ownership and governance structures, and those are, that's the major issue that you've got on the Three Waters example. But what I'd say to you is, we are a country built on bicultural traditions, but we are also a modern multicultural country that needs to look forward and go forward and get out in the world.
Just on a modern multicultural country, one of the 400,000 odd voters that the National Party lost, a huge chunk of them over the last 2 elections have been from electorates with large migrant communities. The middle class migrant culture in New Zealand is a big part of was a big part of the key English formula. How do you plan to, but they're all gone now, they all went over, heaps of them went over later. What's your plan to get those votes back? Look,
I think I know that community really well. I come from an electorate botany that has 36% European, 25% Chinese, 15% Indian, 15% Pacifica. And so, the reality is, new migrants coming to New Zealand, new New Zealanders, they arrive here, they work incredibly hard, they've left their homeland behind, they start often at the very bottom, they take 2 jobs, 3 jobs, they buy that first house, the first business. And so those are people that I'm talking about when I say unleashing enterprise, and actually empowering them to get on with their lives. And, they work incredibly hard, they pay their taxes, they raise their kids as well as they can. They're exactly what we're talking about. They've made New Zealand much richer, much better, not just economically, but socially and culturally too.
Just go back to politics for a minute. One of the things that you said earlier today, I think, was that as a CEO in charge of an exec, you have a transferable skill that you can bring over to running a caucus. But the key difference is if someone's not too happy about the direction of an executive, you can get rid of them. If you do that in politics, you can risk bad blood, recriminations, whatever else. How do you plan to manage that?
Well, look, I think that's really about how you work with each individual and get the best out of them. Do you know what I mean? And inspire them to want to show up at work and get the best out of them, literally. I've worked in teams, with executive teams with a wide range of personalities, and that haven't always often synced up together. And you're the catalyst to be enabling that to happen. And it doesn't mean that we'll have some real conversations and we'll have some robust conversations, and that's important. But as long as we have good trust amongst each other, that's the thing that makes the difference. And so I get it. People say, "Oh, that's very different from politics," and I understand that. It is different. That's what I meant before. It is a different game, and it is a different set of processes and content. But some of it is very transferable.
Looking ahead at when do you expect to be announcing a new caucus?
Well, that's the process that we'll have to go through in the next few days. And essentially what it is making sure that we've got individuals hooked up to the portfolios that most suit them. And I can tell you honestly, over the last 4 days, we've had I was really impressed with the quality of the conversations. It was actually everybody saying, yep, this is our moment to turn the page, to demonstrate to the New Zealand people that National is back. To go out to those 413 voters that have left us and actually say to them, hey, we're back and we're going to work really hard to earn your trust to win in 2023. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Politics is a mixture. I mean, in something like selecting a caucus, it's a mixture, I guess, of choosing on merit, but also reflecting a New Zealand back to people. So how important will be getting the right mix of diversity within your caucus lineup so that National reflects New Zealand back to New Zealand?
Look, I mean, first and foremost, I'm a performance talent person. That's really important that the what people do and then the how they go about doing it. Those are the two metrics by which I manage people. There are great people who can get a lot of stuff done, but they cause a lot of collateral damage in the way they go about doing things. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time, perfecting the how, but actually don't deliver anything on the outcome side. So, that's just my philosophy. It's how I've run, myself or built my own career and how I've run our teams or teams in the past. And it's the same thing here. And so we'll work our way through in the coming days and get that together. But what I can tell you is there is a heap of talent in those 33 people within that room. They're smart, they're intelligent, they're hardworking. They've got different real life experiences from different, aspects of coming into Parliament. And we're going to hook up that potential and get them working on problems that everyday New Zealanders encounter. And I tell you, when we're finished, line them all up and put them person on person and tell me who you want as a minister. And I think you'll find you want a national government in 23.
Very quickly, before we finish off, by the middle of next year, where do you want the National Party to be?
Well, I want us focused on winning in 2023. And so really it's about we're working well as a team, we're focusing around our portfolios, focusing on the things that matter most to New Zealanders, and having focus is the key thing.
And do you have a polling figure in mind that you'd like to boost the party up to?
No, we're going to take it day by day and actually just focus on if we do it right, everything else will take care of itself. And so the bottom line is, we know we've got work to do, but what you saw today was a National Party turn the page, say we're leaving the past and we're going forward. You saw a caucus come out with an uncontested decision, which is fantastic because that's how the National Party has always historically done things up until recently. And now we are going forward together as a team. And the combination I appreciate with me being new and coming from a different world, but I know how to solve problems, get things done and do it through people, and that is within working that complementary skill set that then comes with a really well organised and a team that's really humming with all their different skills and proficiencies is what we need.
Crystal Luxon, thanks so much for making time. Busy day for you today. Congratulations again, and thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Luke.